Now, in yesterday's video, I talked about what seems like the obvious and inevitable return of Palpatine in Episode 9, and how, if done right, it could work and make sense that he's been the big overarching villain of the whole damn saga, and if done wrong, it may come off feeling like a ploy, or like they're just using an old beloved character to put butts in theater seats come this December. However, one of the things I didn't talk about is just how exactly he might be used, because the thing is, just Palpatine being back or possibly coming back and needing to be stopped just because of who he is can't be the whole story or plot of the movie. In other words, he has to be more than just some sort of looming existential threat. And sure, the more knowledgeable Star Wars fan will know that him coming back is just in general bad for the people who live in the Star Wars galaxy, and that's that. It marks the return of the Sith, and considering how clever he is, it's only a matter of time before he finds himself back in a position of power and wreaking havoc on the galaxy once more. Assuming he doesn't just flat out take control of the First Order, which was born from the ashes of his empire, though don't tell that to Kylo Ren, because last we saw him, he had declared himself Supreme Leader, and was all about letting the past die and didn't seem all too interested in letting the Sith rise once more, or being subservient to anyone again. Anyway, what I'm basically trying to say here is Palpatine has to represent a clear and present danger right in this movie or story, one that can be easily understood by even the most casual of Star Wars fan or just an average moviegoer. In other words, this movie has to either be about stopping Palpatine from coming back, otherwise something bad will immediately happen, or stopping Palpatine, who's already secretly back because he's trying to accomplish this specific thing and he's already close to it. And so, in regards to that, one of the things I keep hearing rumors or theories about is that Palpatine is trying to create yet another superweapon. And I get it, that's just his thing. The guy likes having a giant planet-destroying weapon in his arsenal, and who wouldn't? And even though the first two he built were destroyed shortly after becoming operational, and only getting a couple of uses out of them, that apparently hasn't deterred him one bit if there's any truth to these rumors or theories. Not to mention, if he has been behind absolutely everything the whole time, he might even be responsible for Starkiller Base being built, which also got taken out shortly after it became operational. In fact, if we dig into the other sources of canon, in Aftermath we learn about these Sith observatories, which had many functions, but one of them was storing plans for incredibly powerful superweapons. And I'd guess, one way or the other, that's where the designs for Starkiller Base came from, since it represents such a huge leap in technology from what the first two Death Stars were. So it's then possible that construction of Starkiller Base, which seems to be the ultimate super weapon since it can take out entire star systems, was being constructed while Palpatine was still alive and while the second Death Star was also still under construction. In fact, though, I'm not sure how the logistics of all this would work and where all the resources would come from, but perhaps the second Death Star was merely a distraction from what he really was trying to build. Perhaps Palpatine had foreseen that the second Death Star would be destroyed, and him along with it, and that he'd rise from the dead several years later and have his real super weapon ready at that point, Starkiller Base. And that he'd also have the apprentice he really wanted, that being Kylo Ren, who was, shall we say, hopefully going to be a non-burnt version of Darth Vader. And that the only thing he hadn't foreseen all along is that the Force would awaken Rey in an effort to, shall we say, put the future back into motion, to change it from what he had foreseen and to be a kink in his plans. Because keep in mind, if Rey isn't captured by Kylo Ren, and he likely would have taken no interest in her unless he'd felt something like the Force coming from within her, well, Finn would have no reason to go to Starkiller Base to try and rescue Rey, which means there's a good chance the attack to take out Starkiller Base fails, and the returned Palpatine would still have his big super weapon. Now, do I really think that's going to be the case? No, it's just a fun theory I thought I'd throw out there. But anyway, one does still have to wonder how the First Order was able to so quickly build itself back up in the wake of the Empire's destruction, to create not only fleets of new Star Destroyers, enough to reign and control the whole of New Republic space, as the opening crawl of The Last Jedi implies, but to also have the resources and manpower to build a planet-sized weapon without word ever getting back to the New Republic. And sure, Starkiller Base was built out in the unknown regions, but nobody stumbled across what they were doing out there and said something, nor did the New Republic think it was wise to try and keep tabs on anything and everything the remnants of the Empire might be up to. Nobody was spying on them. You're just going to let the regime that ruled the galaxy with an iron fist for 25 years do whatever it wants out in the unknown regions, because you just assume they'll behave themselves and follow your new galactic concordance and not rearm themselves? Anyway, despite what it might sound like, I do think that The Force Awakens is a good movie for what it is, a welcoming back to Star Wars. Now, I don't love it or hate it, it's just kind of there for me because, well, it's a welcoming back to Star Wars and I hadn't gone anywhere. The one thing I really don't like about it is the inclusion of Starkiller Base. Because pretty much the only reason it's in there is to be a giant reset button that takes us back to what Star Wars was like at its very beginning with A New Hope, where there's a ragtag group of rebels, or in this case the Resistance, struggling against a mighty empire, or in this case the First Order. And with one shot, a faction, that being the New Republic, that an entire trilogy had been all about establishing, had just been completely wiped out. And when you really think about it or look at the story, that's all Starkiller Base was actually in there for or accomplished. It apparently wiped out the whole New Republic in one fell swoop and let the First Order walk right in and immediately take control of the galaxy, and then it just got itself blown up. And it's just kind of silly that there's virtually no opposition to the First Order after what they've done, which is destroy an entire heavily populated star system, even though much of the galaxy would still remember and have the scars from the Empire's rule. And there's also the fact that their superweapon that blew up the Hosnian system has already been destroyed and needn't be feared by anyone who wants to resist the First Order. And not to get too far off track here, but what I love about Palpatine and the prequels is he took over everything from within. He had the Republic that he was eventually going to turn into his empire, build for him the infrastructure and army he was going to use to keep them ruled and in check. Nor did he have to conquer anybody or anything. They gave him all the power not only willingly, but happily. And by the time people started to really wake up and realize what had happened, it was far too late. And I know not everyone loves the prequel movies themselves or the exact way the story was told, but you do have to at least appreciate the setup they did have for the original trilogy. The other odd thing about Starkiller Base then is just how easily it actually was destroyed, and I find it ever so strange that the second movie Lucasfilm under Disney gives us is Rogue One. Now why do I say that? Well, because in their first movie, The Force Awakens, the Resistance learns about the existence of Starkiller Base after it's used on the Hosnian system, of course. And they then, I'm assuming at least, have someone just take a ship and go scan Starkiller Base, and later that same day, they can deduce exactly how it works. Now sure, Finn the janitor was there to help them make sense of it all, but come on. They have one 3-minute meeting where they stand around the scan and discuss something that, at the start of the day, no one would have ever imagined could even exist, that being a weapon that sucks the energy of an entire star, and then shoots a giant beam of energy through hyperspace. Anyway, they pretty much immediately realize all they have to do is blow up the oscillator and the whole damn thing will explode. And I can't help but feel like if the Resistance can figure that out in 3 minutes, someone in the First Order would have realized there's a problem with the oscillator, and I don't know, maybe they would have put it 100 miles underground instead of right on the surface of the planet, or at the very least had it heavily shielded, as well as being tough to just blast through, which at the very least it was, so I'll give them credit for that at least. Still, it seems to be the one and only weakness a weapon the size of a planet has, so why not give a bit more thought to its placement and protection? And yes, I'll give it to you, they did do almost the exact same thing in Return of the Jedi. They had a scan of the second Death Star, and from it, they figured out how to blow the thing up. And I'm not saying I love the idea of another Death Star in that movie, but two things to keep in mind here are that it wasn't completed yet, and that there were holes in it that led to the main reactor, and well, I think even I could figure out that if you flew into it and blew up that reactor, you were going to blow up the whole Death Star. Plus, the Empire had a powerful shield around the whole thing that needed to be taken out before any such attack could even be attempted. And I'm going to make the assumption here that once completed, the second Death Star would have had virtually no flaws and would have been damn near indestructible, and that there wouldn't have been an oscillator anywhere on its surface. And then when we go back to the first Death Star, which was 100% completed, the only reason it was vulnerable at all was because a flaw had been built into it and hidden. We then had a whole movie, Rogue One, about discovering that flaw and getting the plans to analyze them with the slim hope that maybe, just maybe, it could eventually be destroyed. The next movie, chronologically, is then A New Hope, which is all about getting those plans back to the rebellion and ultimately destroying it at the end. And if that attack had failed, the flaw would have been fixed or corrected. And do keep in mind, in A New Hope, Tarkin is told the rebellion's plan is a credible threat, meaning they figured out the exhaust port was a problem, and it would have been fixed very shortly thereafter. My point here is the last thing I want out of Episode 9 is another super weapon on any level. Please come up with something new, some type of different imminent threat the return of Palpatine represents. Because Sometimes these things are easy to take out and it can be done in the back half of a movie. Other times these super weapons are near impossible to destroy and it takes 2 whole movies to explore and resolve the entire struggle. Not to mention, the idea is just getting old and tired, and it's time for the bad guys in Star Wars to come up with a new idea. Because every time they make one of these things and it gets destroyed, it only makes them look dumber and dumber, and you do a disservice to the overall story. And yeah, I can understand and get behind why Palpatine made the first one. The idea being that no one would ever dare oppose him or step out of line if they knew their whole planet could be destroyed. And yeah, I can even forgive him for making the second one, because if it wasn't for that pesky design flaw in the first one, it would have probably never been destroyed and the Empire would have never been stopped. But if the guy who was brilliant and crafty enough to conquer the Republic from within, and who was wise and powerful enough with the Force to cheat death, immediately thinks to himself upon coming back from the dead, you know what, let's try that super weapon thing again. It's bound to work this time. Well, I really don't know if I'll be able to take it. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me if you dread the thought of yet another super weapon in Episode 9, or if you'd be okay with it. And what do you think Palpatine's plan should be this time? Or does he not really need one, and his return is all the threat we need? Let me know what you think in the comments below, and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.